And welcome to the Philistine Podcast, a podcast where we are challenged with trying to articulate a love for art and storytelling. Today I am joined by my nature-loving friend, Lucy.
Hello, everyone.
I'm glad everybody could join us today. Thank you very much for being here, because today we will be talking about Chris Renaud's 2012 film, The Lorax. All right, The Lorax. Where should we start? We have this young boy trying to woo this obvious older woman. He learns that she likes trees. He finally asks the question, what happened to all the trees? The town has been displaced by a totalitarian corporation instead of a government. Ted ostensibly escapes. I would expect bigger consequences leaving the town, because O'Hare's obviously the end-all be-all overseer of this place, right? I would expect Ted to be executed upon capture or return, but Ted reaches out to the Once-ler. We then learn the story of the Lorax. It's a weird movie, and there's some things I like about it. There's some things that I'm not really sure how I feel about it. It's obviously got some really bad moments, everything to do with the mom, the grandma, and maybe a little bit to do with Ted's motivation to get his hands on a tree. I guess love makes us do crazy things. I will say I absolutely love this idea of big business creating a problem and then also big business providing the solution to that problem. Of course, the Once-ler has his ups and downs with nature and the critters and Lorax. Things escalate. He, I guess on some level, loses control of the operation because his family gets involved. Maybe this implication of a corporation, a business, an innovation taking on a life of its own. But I hate to say that there just doesn't seem to be an effect of what greed can result in. But I'm also not very sure what I want out of this, because the townsfolk are disturbing, to say the least. I almost wish there was this moment of one of the townsfolk or someone trying to convince Ted that everything's fine here, almost revealing a Truman Show type situation. I will also add that I kind of enjoy the effect of the Lorax, because he shows up, he's sort of all-powerful, right? But he's not at the same time. He's almost just this cautionary tale more than anything, to literally warn you, but then he's just gonna let nature run its course and you're gonna learn your lesson the hard way instead of, intervening in any kind of godlike way. But I don't know, man. I'm weirded out by this movie, to say the least, and I'm very curious how you feel about the Lorax.
I absolutely love this movie. I've seen it so many times. I could probably tell you beat by beat what happens. I hadn't seen it recently, so I was a little bit scared if I would see things differently this time around with my new Shinigami eyes. But I'll be happy to report that I still absolutely love this movie. There's nothing overly complex story-wise, yet the tone and the subtext really gets you thinking and really makes you ask who this movie is for. I'm not sure if this is an unpopular opinion, but the movie adapts the source material very effectively. Probably one of the better ones I've seen. It preserves the message, the core message of Dr. Seuss's book, and adds to it. The new content elevates it in so many ways. The plot really works for me. I love the perspective of this film being told from a teenage boy's point of view, and how his mission does grow into something deeper. Because you're right, love does make us do stupid things, and wars have been fought over less. I think one of the most unique things about this movie is who it's geared towards. You think Dr. Seuss, and you mainly think it's geared towards kids, but a lot of his books have very deep human messaging and values. these universal values, right? Like kindness, fairness, bravery, and self-worth, which are timeless. These are really universal ideas that we need to keep in film, in art, and I'll never get tired of a movie where our main message is to be kind to each other or to have some kind of hope. I really like that we have these themes on nature, conservation, and greed, but we take these a bit further and talk about responsibility. More importantly, an individual's responsibility, where you stand in the grand scheme of things. The film asks what happened in this world, what went wrong in this world, and continues it with, so what are you going to do about it? It feels very call to action, and I like that. And to me, one of the most important themes in this movie is advocacy and speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. That right there just makes me tear up every time. I love that the Lorax speaks for the trees. And there's so many creatures he speaks for. And these creatures, the trees, they all represent something, and that's innocence. And what I really like about this is that, yes, it's funny to see these creatures go crazy over some marshmallows, but when you really think about the movie and what's happening, you start to think about all of the human manipulation towards nature, even when that's not the intent. I didn't experience this movie as a kid. I was already a teenager when it came out. But as a kid, respecting nature is so obvious. And I guess it's kind of shoved in your face by the school system. They try to incorporate moments like Earth Day and try to teach you about environmentalism and nature and all of that stuff. But you haven't really had the chance to make adult decisions yet, or be put in these adult situations where that stuff matters. Your choices matters. And then you grow up, you become an adult, and then it's suddenly something you're not thinking about anymore, unless you're probably actively in that world. And this movie really speaks to me in that way because there's such a moral and ethical quandary, because the question isn't whether conserving or environmentalism is right or wrong. I think we're pretty much aligned there, that nature must be protected. But this movie covers some of the dilemmas that you don't think about, like the trade-offs or the long-term effects or who has rights, because trees don't have rights. Why should they? This movie has always made me think about the world and my place in it. And every time I watch it, I just have this enormous feeling about the line that gets drawn, the line between greed versus commodity and complacency, that line between industry and nature, and just how difficult that is, and it still is. And no matter where the conversation gets taken, we can't come to an agreement. And I 100% agree with you. This movie is weird, because behind the colorful facade, the whimsical facade, this movie is eerie. The townsfolk are eerie. Everyone is happy and accepting, sort of given this ignorance is bliss attitude. I like the animation style of this movie and all the characters. The voice acting is good. Honestly, I didn't get distracted by Danny DeVito or Zac Efron or Taylor Swift. I really couldn't tell it was them. And the best part of the film for me was this relationship between the Lorax and the Once-ler. It's like the Lorax is this visual representation of the Once-ler's conscience. Because you're right, it's not that he has or doesn't have power to do anything, but it's that he doesn't. He's just there to let us and the Once-ler know the consequences to his actions, and then it's on him to decide what he wants to do. The comedy, the humor is a bit goofy, a bit slapstick, and several moments could be seen as, let's insert this for the kids, for their humor, like the mom dancing to a disco song when she turns the tree on. But it wasn't too bad. There were actually several moments where I really laughed out loud. I think one of the funniest parts in the movie as silly as it is when the Once-ler is walking back and they all have cards in their hand. As far as the songs and the musical elements, I like them. I love the Let It Grow theme sprinkled everywhere throughout the film. That was a very nice touch. I like when movies have a theme. The sound design was great. The pacing was perfect. The movie is short and sweet and to the point. And overall, I think this movie is about hope. To be hopeful that individuals will make the right choice, will stand up to fight for what they think is right, even if they're the only ones fighting for what's right. And at its core, that is the message of the book. And I don't know, there's something in this movie that just kills me with emotion. And I'm bawling by the end of it.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I will say the voice acting thing is so funny, isn't it? Because obviously some voices are just going to poke out to certain people. Danny DeVito might be one of those people. And of course, that might take you out of it. But I will mostly agree the voice acting is actually pretty darn good. And I think you can even see that in a lot of Illumination films. There does seem to be an intent on designing these characters, animating these characters around their voice instead of just putting this voice in the character. One of the recent really bad offenders of just putting a voice in a character is Bad Guys, the animated heist movie. Well, I think the beginning has a heist, but there's a lot of stupid in this movie. There's a lot of kiddie elements, and I like that you bring up the marshmallow thing because that is a very clear, in quotes, offender of appealing to the brain rot of 2012. But there is something charming and right about that particular example in that it's sort of suggesting companies giving you something sweet and something to chew on that you like to either distract you or make them look like a good guy. I mean, and in that sense, a lot of the Once-ler sections are actually pretty good. I don't really want to compare the original or the book or anything, but there was something much more human about this Once-ler than the other Once-ler. The other Once-ler is the hands of the invisible hands of capitalism. Here, the Lorax comes off like a Jiminy Cricket. He plants, if you will, doubt and questioning of oneself, right? And kind of also insinuating that only you can stop yourself. But the movie really isn't about the Lorax and the Once-ler. It's a little bigger than that. It's kind of like what you were saying, and I kind of said earlier about the effects of the effects. It's kind of this post-apocalyptic situation of what the Once-ler has caused, and then someone else has caused something else. Now we're dealing with that. It's weird. I'm not sure how else to feel about the mom and a lot of the things, the chase scenes and Thneedville or whatever it's called. The lack of intent around the civilians of Thneedville and the mom and the grandma kind of insinuating that she knows more than she's letting on. I like that she's pretending to be ancient, dementia-ridden old woman, but when the mom walks away, she's, a secret agent, basically.
Yeah, I love that she's in on it.
I wish we could have gotten more of her being in on something. She wasn't really in on anything. She just was secretive. And I hate to say it, but that's kind of the movie, is Ted moving about. Yeah, we get the flashback story section with the Once-ler, and it's definitely the strength of the film. But Ted's motion and all this, his purpose is, I guess, obviously kind of an audience surrogate type thing, but it feels kind of intentless. With the exception of him obviously being some kind of Jiminy Cricket type subconscious parallel to the Lorax. He reintroduces these memories, this doubt, these questioning, this self-hatred in the Once-ler, and kind of makes him want to correct his wrong. And I guess I will also add, I don't really like the results of that because it's almost like him and the Lorax, because the Lorax just shows up right towards the end, and they kind of make up, him and the Once-ler. But the Once-ler more or less caused an apocalypse It's like, this is kind of unforgivable on some level. I mean, I don't know what I want them to do with him. Maybe crucify him or something? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's definitely a redemption story there with the Once-ler. I personally like that the Lorax comes back and he's basically been watching him this entire time, especially if he is a representation of his conscience. The Once-ler has such a relief from Ted helping him restore something back that he has caused. Because that is one of the points of the movie. An individual can make a difference. Because I agree that giving the Once-ler personality, individuality, creating Ted as an audience surrogate, yes, but we also make him a fleshed out, semi-fleshed out character with goals and motivations. So we make them individuals to drive that point of an individual can make a difference. Even if all the Once-ler can do is tell someone a story of his mistakes and hoping and wishing that they'll learn from it. I definitely agree that the Ted parts of the film aren't as fleshed out as the Once-ler and the Lorax parts. Those do have the most silly kid elements to them, even if I like some of them. But I enjoyed the back and forth. I enjoyed Ted's point of view from this, especially what we make his character do. He's nonstop, right? He's the sense of urgency that I think is very important to the message, again, because you do need to act with the sense of urgency. He's always moving. He's always on and about trying to, whether for the right reasons or not, get this story out of the Once-ler, and visually seeing the audience surrogate make the difference is pretty cool. We should have cut out maybe some of the parts with the mom, or maybe reframed them a little bit, made him have a relationship with his grandma. Maybe us finding out that the grandma was that little girl who threw that tomato would be funny. Because I do enjoy the bits with the grandma. I do enjoy how she is trying to help Ted get this out, and how here's your mom stopping you from doing what you need to do, because that's what moms do. But then you have moments where Ted is kissing the cereal and having this dream scenario about Audrey. But those are so small that I'm okay with them.
Man, I want to agree, but they don't feel very small because of the focus on Ted. Because I like this point you're bringing up, this representation of Ted when a big problem is presented, like the holes in the ozone layer or different animals going extinct or whatever kind of conspiratorial type things. They become this kind of urgent matter, or they do, at least in like an idealistic sense. And I guess one of my problems is Ted isn't really fixing anything. He didn't really learn anything in the story with the Once-ler and the Lorax. He didn't learn that O'Hare is just another Once-ler. I don't even think he got an appreciation for Audrey having this incredible forethought for something that she's never even witnessed. The film struggles to connect the two sections, I think. And I think there's a lot of ways you could probably go about it. And obviously, outside of connecting what's happening now in Ted's life and what was happening in the Once-ler's time, smaller things can maybe get you a little bit of mileage. We do see the sign. They're in Thneedville, right? Maybe the grandma could have brought out a Thneed. We don't really know her place in all of this. Like I was kind of saying, she's a double agent type person, and it doesn't go anywhere outside of kind of motivating Ted.
But that's the point, right?
Yeah, but she seems more important than that because she's the only person in Thneedville that's not a robot, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's weird, and it needs a little bit more to kind of complete the thought of not letting something like the Once-ler's actions happen again, to maybe regulate it or something, or just have everybody aware of it, because they're not aware of it. Make people have some kind of moral agency in what they're doing, but they're happy to support O'Hare. It's just the way life is.
Yeah, I definitely can see how that can come across that way. But I don't know if I completely agree with you. I think Ted learns from the Once-ler to act. Right? That's the whole point of the unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get done. And that springs him into action, into doing something. Also, that's where the perspective point comes in too, that Ted is a teenage boy. This starts out as a crush, doing something to impress someone, and evolves into doing something for someone else, for the world, for the nature, for whatever, and not necessarily to get the girl anymore, but to fix a problem. But I can also see it in the way that the audience is the one that's learning these things, maybe not Ted exactly learn these things. So we feel it because we, the audience, learned it from the Once-ler, and that's not necessarily a pass for the director, the writers, whatever, to rely on that. That because we learned it, we're assuming Ted learned it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a half step.
Mm-hmm.
But they're definitely, in the right lane. They were onto something, obviously, in 2012. It would have helped, I think, if we could have mirrored the two stories, Ted's story and the Once-ler story, a little bit more in different ways. Maybe Ted wrangles in Audrey, wrangles in his family to mirror the Once-ler's family, and we both now have families kind of in versions of each other. One is destructive and at the helm of letting this beast get out of control, and the other one is trying to reveal the evils of it, to regulate it, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair, because I was also thinking, when was that turning point for Ted? Was it O'Hare's confrontation? Was it the middle part of the story?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a moment of resignation of any kind with Ted.
Yeah.
The fire that's lit under him is to finally kiss Audrey.
But it does change. At one point, it does grow. I just don't know when that happens. There's no clarity for me on Ted's mindset, on when he switches from, this is going to impress Audrey, to, oh, I need to do what's right. Since the audience is aware of O'Hare and his evils, the Once-ler and his regret, it's easier for us to understand when that switch is. And I do believe it is that confrontation when O'Hare is basically like, oh, no one's allowed to leave town, Ted. We're gonna beat you up next time we see you do it. But then Ted's actions aren't as immediate as later on in the film. So I think the film does struggle a little bit to make that flow better.
That's fair. And I will also add, they kind of trivialize that turning point, that unspoken turning point when Audrey gives him a kiss. Because like, oh, now he got what he wanted, the small little thing that he wanted from the very beginning. And it's not to say that Ted grew so much.
He didn't want to kiss anymore?
I'm a hero now type thing.
So do you think the romantic plot cheapened the intentions?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because what Ted is after feels too young for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's revealed that Audrey is like 17 or something at one point, and
yeah, I think he says she's a high school girl. We don't really get her age, but that to me implied that he's not in high school. He's probably in middle school crushing on a high school girl. It could be, 8th grade to a 9th grader. They could be a year apart. She's just so tall. But I don't think there's any specifics on ages.
Yeah, I guess that's just it. It just feels like it cheapens it. And it's even a little bit more confusing in why it's Ted and Audrey, being Theodore and Audrey, the husband and wife of Dr. Seuss. It just feels like there should have been something to that, something intentional, but at best comes across like fluff, some more kiddie kind of stuff, and at worst, distracting. And I suppose I'm mostly hung up because it is the central motivation. And I guess to your point, that motivation never evolves very clearly into something bigger.
No, that's definitely a great point, and actually something I had to think about a lot in this movie. Making sure, A, I liked it. I liked that that was the catalyst, and B, that it made sense. In my mind, I guess I saw it as how many great things come out of something so small, or how many bad things come out of something so small, because you never know the effects of that small thing. I like it because Ted is a teenage boy doing teenage boy things. And I guess especially watching it as a teenager, maybe I had a bit more of that connection with, at that age, you're just doing things that may or may not seem trivial. You sign up for that club that your crush signed up for, and now all of a sudden you're a chess master. Or you go to that university that your high school sweetheart went to, and now you have your master's and a wonderful program. Or the opposite, right? But that's just how we act. That's just how we think. So there was something really sweet about that, at least that being the catalyst that I really liked. But I completely agree that it wasn't as connective and clear as it should have been.
Yeah, I definitely think the biggest problem with this film is the detachment between the two stories.
Mm-hmm. At least until the end.
I also like this point you made earlier. It's also made in the movie that the Lorax speaks for the trees. And we almost see this parallel with Ted. I think it even walks back a little bit with the Lorax. I wish the bears and whatever stayed kind of stupid and oblivious, but they do get a little pissed off at a point, right? Because I like the idea of the Lorax kind of representing nature as a whole and the synchronicity of all that and the obliviousness of, non-sentient beings like these stupid bears and trees.
And walking fish.
And walking fish, of course. And we almost have this parallel with Ted and his town of stupid people, overly happy people, right? Who are oblivious.
No, that's a great point.
And it might work a little better from Ted's angle than the Lorax, because when Ted speaks out against O'Hare at the end, that's when everybody kind of chimes in. And the reverse kind of happens with the Lorax. When the Once-ler cuts down the tree, the bears are taken aback. They're like, this man's tearing our home down. And then the Lorax shows up. And so we get a little bit of the reverse thing happening there. And I wish it would have been dealt out a little bit different. And I think a lot of this just goes to show you how there is this massive effort to make this film special a little more than you might expect. And it just ultimately isn't working for me. Everything seems to be a half measure and just not really committed.
Yeah, the themes and the messaging is committed, but maybe the story elements aren't as committed to the messaging and the themes. And I think this film also struggles a bit with who this film is meant for. And I'm not talking about a family-friendly kind of way, where those tend to be for everybody that the whole family can enjoy, but that there's a lot of subtext here. And I think the more I watch it, the more I think about this movie. But it doesn't quite feel as a movie that you see differently as you watch it in time. Maybe a kid who watches this movie and watches it later on as an adult will get two different things from it. I don't think it's that kind of movie, or at least it doesn't try to be that kind of movie. And like we said, this movie is weird enough that it doesn't quite fit into those family-friendly kind of movies. So maybe a commitment to who this really is for, which I think it really is for adults, maybe younger adults, and try to mold some of the story elements with that in mind than with kids and adults and teenagers. But I still think it is effective in adapting that source material. I think it's a great call making Ted our audience surrogate. I think it's a great call giving the Once-ler a personality. I know you brought up the business aspect of the film, with the business creating the problem and then providing a solution to the problem. But how did you feel about O'Hare, especially O'Hare as a villain?
O'Hare is a small problem. He's obviously an offender of our target audience, right? He's a little dude. He's got his big henchmen. They like put their hands in a stair-step motion to walk for O'Hare to walk in his car. It's cute and funny. He's arguably the star of the movie. He's very striking on screen. He's got a lot of personality, but he's not very effective as the villain, as the overseer, as this entity that has basically displaced some kind of government, right? O'Hare's a really interesting idea. He's the second coming of a Once-ler, except in a really smart way, where the Once-ler was this entrepreneur who refined a resource. He refined the oil, the wood, the steel, right? He provided a commodity that is very useful, a real commodity, something that has real value. O'Hare is this new wave capitalist selling you something that you do not need, something that big business is pretending that you need. They're convincing you. I think much like mouthwash in the beginning. I think an early mouthwash company invented the term halitosis to scare people into buying mouthwash. There's obviously something very cool about what O'Hare represents. He's the natural next step of big business that steps in the most dire of times. But like a lot of Ted's story, he doesn't really have any influence over the rules of the universe. Maybe O'Hare should have tried to go collect the Once-ler, put him in prison or something. We should have connected them a little bit. O'Hare didn't really interfere enough in a consequential way with Ted and the Once-ler and the tree. And Audrey. Maybe he should have thrown Audrey in prison. She's thinking about trees. She's drawing trees. They did cover up her mural, I think, at one point. There's something to that. But maybe there should have been this slick insinuation of her being thrown in prison and then escaping or something. We never really see it, much to my earlier point of someone like the milkman or someone in Thneedville cornering Ted and trying to re-brainwash him or something. So there's some parts of O'Hare that I like a lot, but much like the film, I'm very kind of non-committal to how I feel about this movie.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing about the townspeople is that ignorance. So I think O'Hare relied a little too much on that ignorance. He got confident that they'll remain ignorant. Maybe he didn't know how to control the situation once he found a couple of kids doing something out of the norm, not being blissfully happy.
I mean, that's a really great point, especially today, many years after 2012, kind of insinuating that a business is too big to fail. Maybe even a deeply integrated ideology is too hard to reverse.
But I do like everything else he represents. The fakeness, right? He claims his products are eco-friendly, but he's destroying everything else. He's censoring knowledge. Build a wall around Thneedville so no one had to see the outside world, so he wouldn't have any repercussions. But I've always thought how funny it was, funny in a not funny way, that he's selling air. And the way he sells his air is very representative of how we sell water today, right? In big gallons, in a water bottle. And that's always stuck with me. Again, drawing to a real world scenario here. So I really like that. It's so good. It's so eerie.
And there's almost something genuine about it, too, because there are some places in the U.S., China, that have really poor air quality. And maybe some reality you wouldn't think twice about someone selling air in a bottle. And similar for water. Some places in the world have very clean water. Lots of places do not.
Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you start entering those lines that I talked about earlier. How is there a control on necessities? I don't know. That's the thing I love about this movie, just how it makes you think about things. Maybe there's other films that get you thinking about things like this. But I really like that this one is animated. It's spelled out to me. It's literal. You mentioned the connection between O'Hare and the Once-ler and how we really don't have a connection between them. However, there is a small scene in the film where we see a younger version of O'Hare sort of admiring the Once-ler and his sails with the Thneed, and you see his little wheels turning in his brain. And although I really like that scene, I like that small little connection, how he was the inspiration, and like you said, O'Hare is the next natural progression of the Once-ler. And maybe this is just me, but it sort of got me thinking about the timeline of the film. And maybe that's one of my biggest problems with the movie, is that I thought we were further, at least way further, than seeing a teenage working man O'Hare and now a corporate CEO O'Hare, mayor, whatever he is. And he's not that old.
Yeah, what's it been, like 20 years?
Yeah.
30 years?
So I really don't like that, because the grandma mentions how she was a little girl when there were trees. But then the grandma's like way older, so I don't know if that's just a me problem.
You know, it's kind of funny, and to kind of all my points, there's something really genius in there, in that it happens time and time again. We forget how companies treat us. We forget that your iPhone used to be waterproof. They take it away for a couple years, and then they give it back to you like it's a new feature. The vast majority of people in Thneedville were there with the Once-ler. They saw the Once-ler and his industry and their consumerism destroy the world, ostensibly, and they're here again being taken advantage of in a different way. The inclusion of Grandma saying it in that way, that there were trees when I was young, is a little misleading, I think. I was definitely there with you, and then, yeah, when they show us O'Hare being younger and the Once-ler is there, she's like, so everyone in town definitely knows the Once-ler, right? I think she was just trying to relate to Ted, and she should have said that a little differently to make it clear.
Okay.
But the grandma's so confusing in this movie that who is this woman?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement. And I like a lot what you said. And it just really makes you think about all the things people buy, especially all the stupid things people will buy, like a Thneed. Because even when the Once-ler is telling Ted the story, he's like, I don't even know what you mean, but okay, that's awesome. And it really reminds me of these as seen on TV type things.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe next time I rewatch this movie, I'm going to pay attention to the inside of people's houses. Because you almost expect one of those Thneeds to be in the corner somewhere. It's like how I imagine many people out there have something in the corner of their house that a lot of people have just sitting there because it was the fad or the revolutionary thing, like the George Foreman grill. I want to give a shout out to the dialogue and how rhythmic it was, how similar it was to the book, to Dr. Seuss's freestyle, and just how sprinkled it was throughout the entire movie.
Yes, certainly, especially with the Once-ler and the Lorax.
Yeah, that narration of the story.
I will also shout out, kind of alluding to something you said earlier, this humanization of someone like the Once-ler. Because yes, there are maybe your O'Hares out there who know they're taking advantage of people, who want to take advantage of people, who want to pull a fast one and just benefit and gain on whoever and everyone. But then you have the Once-lers and maybe the guy who invented TikTok or maybe AI, these potentially very predatory, destructive innovations that we've adopted very quickly and obsessively. I'm sure a few of them think, man, what have I unleashed?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and feel very guilty. The Once-ler is obviously somewhat guilty.
I think he's super guilty. He holds himself up in his house. He boards himself in his house. Like, he doesn't even deserve to go outside.
Sure, and it's also a good reference to the source material of not seeing him.
Mm.
It's kind of cool. That's a good point, though. And I guess to that point, I almost wish we didn't see O'Hare. Maybe he was just this godlike thing that was watching everyone.
Kind of like Big Brother.
Yes, exactly.
Some 1984.
Obviously not completely unlike the source material with the Once-ler and seeing his hands. Having that kind of thematic attachment could have got some mileage too. But there is this overall kind of sympathetic point of not knowing the effects too.
Yeah, definitely. That's why the reunion between him and the Lorax is so heartbreaking. It's almost like they came out of a battle together. The last thing I want to talk about is my favorite part of the movie. And it's when the Once-ler first meets these woodland creatures, and they're all singing and dancing. And there's this orchestra type classical music playing, and then it gets interrupted by him playing the electric guitar. And that scene has always stuck out to me. And after he plays that guitar, the mood changes, and these woodland creatures are very mesmerized by what's going on. We have the marshmallows, and then he chops down the tree, and the Lorax shows up. And just everything that happens in this sequence is so good on so many levels. I like that clash between the music foreshadowing what's about to happen, how something so modern is going to negatively impact these creatures.
Yeah, human involvement. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And again, I mentioned earlier about the marshmallows being a sort of human manipulation. I love that. He cuts down the tree and he leaves. He's done. He's made his impact. And then here's the Lorax appearing. He's sad. And immediately he starts making a grave, a symbolic representation of the death. And all the creatures start coming in and helping him put the rocks around the stump. And similar to the marshmallow bit, there's a bit here where that big cuddly bear is carrying a small rock, and one of the tinier bears is pushing, or it might have been a fish, I don't remember, but they're tiny and they're pushing a giant rock. And just how on the surface that could be the kid humor, a gag, similar to the marshmallows again. But there's just something so sweet here with it representing that no matter what size you are, who you are, you're helping and you're doing your best and you're doing what you can do, especially in a time of mourning. And there's just so many elements in that sequence that I can completely see how someone can write it off as it being super kiddish. But again, that's that subtext I'm talking about, that impact of human interactions with nature.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of fire in that section. And it's kind of funny because you explaining your love, your fascination with this film only kind of confirms some of my thoughts where that's just another great half measure. And this one's kind of low-hanging fruit. Hear me out. We have that little ceremonial scene, right? Just the way it is, close to the beginning of the Once-ler's arrival. But towards the end, after the forest is completely knocked down, we have this camera movement showing that exact rock memorial. Yeah, kind of giving a double meaning to when it first happens with the Lorax and the critters. Almost being this forward-looking acknowledgement of the end times are here. You know, humanity has caught up to this corner of nature too, kind of thing. And how powerful that would have been. And I suppose we do see the rocks laid out at the very end.
That's where the Lorax appears when he comes back.
And to me, it just seems kind of like a misplacement of what it represents because it's too far gone. There is no symbolic death. If anything, we should have something sprout out in between the rocks. And I guess maybe we do at the very end because little Thneed trees are...
They're called truffula trees.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. We don't talk about the Thneed anymore.
But I guess it just seems like a misuse of some of the things that they already set in motion, and they could have really kind of hit you in the heartstrings.
I might disagree with you there a little bit. They definitely hit me in the heartstrings. I'm not sure how many times that appears, but him writing the word unless on there, or the Once-ler, I'm not sure who writes it, really drives that symbol into that grieving mourning ceremony that they did.
All right, man. Well, thank you very much for watching this movie and talking about it here today. That was awesome.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching this movie with me. It means a lot.
Do you have a budget guess?
I'm going with 55 million, and I'm completely basing that off of this being an Illumination movie, an animated movie, a 1 hour and 26 minutes movie. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little bit lower, actually, but definitely in that range.
Well, it says here that it was $70 million.
Oh.
And it went on to make $351 million. So it did okay for itself. And over on Letterboxd with 822,000 people, they weighed in at a 3.3.
Ouch.
I thought I thought that was pretty high, actually.
Oh.
I was like, that's pretty respectable. Especially coming out of Illumination, they seem to be disregarded as, just child schlock.
Mm-hmm. I get that. Yeah, if that doesn't tell you the importance of perspective, I don't know what does. I'm definitely in the 4s for this movie. It definitely checkboxes a lot of the elements I enjoy about film. I need a movie to make me feel something, and I need that something to have a message, have a so what, have an impact to my life, at least an impact to my thoughts. And if you have cute creatures or a big monster, that's definitely a plus. I think there's a lot to love about this film. But after our discussion today, I do think I'm leaning more towards a 4 than a 4.5. Because although I do love the story elements and the catalyst of this starting out as a crush for Ted and turning into something bigger, similar to our own lives, and how something so small can lead to something so much bigger, it's not as cohesive as I wanted it to be, and it definitely misses on some of the connections. Or maybe it didn't think about the possibility of those connections. But everything else was great about it. The animation style, I really do enjoy a lot of Illumination animation. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed all the musical numbers. The musical themes, very nice touch. The song at the end, Let It Grow. And then having O'Hare learn absolutely nothing from this and start singing Let It Die. Hilarious. I love it. The sound design, the score, the pacing, the dialogue, even the voice acting are awesome.
O'Hare should have died at the end, like off camera. He should have been trampled or something. And it was just up for, interpretation, I guess.
No.
Just to kind of elevate the absurdity, the surrealistic, disturbing nature of Thneedville. The Lorax is an interesting movie. There's no doubt about it. We were talking about it days ago that it reminds me of La Bamba. There's just something off about it. It's not a regular movie when it might first appear to be. To me, it is clearly an example of that nexus of taking something that is special, has a lot of juice potentially, especially this prequel, sequel, and inclusion of the Lorax story. It's cool. The structure of it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But they do struggle a lot with merging the kiddie elements and knowing how to connect all of these pieces. But man, is there a lot of gas in this tank. It's just not running super well. They put the wrong kind of gas in this car. And I love what you have brought to the table here today because it's just such a great example of perspective, while watching a film, what editing can do, what an evolution of a story can do, a structure can do, going from that trivial middle school, high school love to arguably saving the planet, I think. Maybe this is a localized apocalyptic event, but maybe this Thneed thing affected the whole world. And the Lorax is a frustrating movie at the end of it for me. It's so non-committal and takes so many half-measured steps that it's kind of hard to navigate. I see a lot of the good, but it is matched with just as much bad. I think you've convinced me the marshmallows are a great idea. The bears eating the marshmallows. I see that. But Thneedville as a whole is kind of a major problem. And then the grandma and the mom and even O'Hare present problem after problem after problem. I think you've revealed to me today that the Lorax is a 2 in my mind. My heart wants me to bring it down to a 1.5 just because so much of the good is matched with so much bad and then some. But there are some things here that are very good. It just seems Chris didn't quite know what they had. But yeah, man, thank you again for watching this movie, and thank you guys for listening to this episode of The Filmistines. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, we post every Wednesday and Friday on patreon.com, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the free feeds with new episodes. Our next episode will be on B-movie.
Yes.
So please look forward to that. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon as well. Come subscribe, come request a movie. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much. But until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Filmistines. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on our cinematic journey. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some new insights and perspectives on the world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, especially Patreon at patreon.com/filmistines. And follow us on social media for more film-related content. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any feedback, suggestions, movie recommendations, or book recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, keep watching and keep loving the magic of movies. This is The Filmistines, signing off.